Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of VNture Podcast with your hosts, myself, Taros, and MR. Today, we're going to be discussing a very old classic archetype of anime heroine characters, the Ojou-sama. And in this podcast episode, MR and I going to discuss what exactly makes an Ojou-sama and some of the heroines we've seen from visual novels and how they may or may not qualify. So, MR, first, what do you have to say for us?
I prepared probably the typical example that I come up with the Maya from Move. But before we start to talk about her, I need to try it once, okay? For all our listeners, I'm sorry, but let me try it. That is the typical Ojou-sama.
Wait a second.
What?
Your mic kind of cut off a little there. I need you to repeat that. We need to hear it in all its glory,
no,
Amar.
No, why you're doing that? You're going full Bruce on me now.
No, go for it. Floor is yours. A plus, 10 out of 10 effort. Thank you, Amar.
Thank you. Okay, back to the topic proper. So, Ojou-sama. A quite interesting pick for archetype to talk about in characters. But I think those are really unappreciated. And that's why I chose or proposed to you that topic. Especially, I wanted to start with Maya, because she exemplifies one characteristic that tends to be in Ojou-sama. They are noble, refined, sometimes needlessly prideful, but importantly, they are powerful with the ability to back it up somehow. And in her case, how she appears out of nowhere, she intrudes upon the protagonist's life, demands that, yes, I'm living together with him, and start all the hijinks. Heck, the mere fact and mention of the Mitsurugi family means she already has a lot of influence. Obviously, they play it off comedy style, with even reshaping the entire district to build a mansion for her nearby. But that's how the Ojou-sama work. They shape the story around itself. And the story has to explain if they can't. In the case of Maya, yes, she commands a very influential group, the Mitsurugi family, right? So whenever something happens at school or outside, they are on the clock 24/7 to help and assist. And everybody else in the story, protagonists and other characters, they stand in awe, looking at unbelievable. Like they are going for the school lunch, and she didn't pack lunch. What happens? The line of chefs from top restaurants line up, ready to cook a meal. Like, what is even happening?
At her beck and call.
Exactly.
Now you do. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one more characteristic that is follows through from that is shown in Maya, and it's very common, and it is the lack of the common sense. She doesn't understand how inappropriate this is to have a line of cooks for the lunch break.
Those are interesting points you mentioned, because I wanted to ask you what exactly makes an Ojou-sama, and you've kind of referred to a few of those aspects of Maya so far. Mm-hmm. In doing my research and looking around, it seems that the definition of an Ojou-sama is simply the daughter of an upper-class family. Typically a wealthy member of society with great political power, because that's what it implies if you're the daughter of an upper-class family. But interestingly, that only refers to the social standing. it doesn't have any bearing on the personality. But if you ask me, most of the time people have the idea of the personality more so than the pure social situation that the character is in. And so when you mentioned here, you have something like Mareeck, who is the daughter of the very powerful company, and in my opinion, that would classify as daughter of an upper class family. And you can see in some of her events where she's very naive about commoner aspects, and she flaunts her power to get what she wants, hopefully. And so, in a sense, she is an Ojou-sama. But how much do you also agree about the personality traits of a typical Ojou-sama being smug, being haughty towards the commoners, who treats others with derision and contempt?
Before I answer your question about those personality traits,
Mm-hmm.
I need to go back to what you said about the social standing, right? Because think about it. From your beloved Fate series, if the only criteria for Ojou-sama would be the social standing and heiress for the noble family, Rin Tosaka fits that criteria. But she doesn't really fit the criteria if you look at the personality traits.
With Fate, it's always a little iffy because you have so many people who come from mage family lineages, and by definition, you kind of already have to be upper class in a way to be a mage. So that muddles things a little. But you are right. She doesn't exhibit many of the traits, although some of them can be a little bit arguable. So that's, what I wanted to ask you, especially in regards to Mareeck. How, she doesn't have the typical long hair ringlets or the laugh.
True.
Although she still ticks a lot of the boxes, and that's what makes it so interesting, is that you have an Ojou-sama who certainly has the most obvious traits, the stereotype, sure, but when you think about it and try to nail down the definitions more, what is essential to being an Ojou-sama and what is just simply, associated with the character archetype?
You found another question. I feel like when it comes to the bare minimums, I think I would say personality that stems from that, how can I say it, combination of lack of common sense and power and ability to back it up somehow. I think those two, I would say, are the bare minimum. Although, to be honest, if those would be the only two traits for the Ojou-sama, it might feel forced and barren, but I think those are at the core principle. And someone who comes from the position of power, authority, or whatever way they can influence others, and they kind of lack the common sense. Now, to answer another question that you asked before I switched topics, for the approach to others, right? It's an alignment on a moral spectrum, to say. I think for Ojou-sama, I think it takes all kinds. Those can be mischievous and those can be benevolent. I mean, some of those Ojou-sama, good-spirited, are guided by noblesse oblige, for example. The responsibility of the privileged people to act with nobility toward those less fortunate. And I would say that kind of approach, that kind of personality, is Ojou-sama. It doesn't have to be very condescending or looking down on them, because it can be viewed through the lens of how to treat them better, knowing your position. And I think like Mareeck fits more the criteria of being on the good side, because she rarely, if ever, looks down on other people. She has that sense of responsibility, the noblesse oblige.
That is true. So all in all, you do very much consider Mareeck a Ojou-sama, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Interesting. And in her case, it's more so because of her status and somewhat of her personality, even though she's lacking the stereotypical features.
Yeah, the real standout that she lacks from the Ojou-sama package is the oh-ho-ho-ho laugh, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one, and she definitely lacks. But the rest, the fact that she's been sheltered, and the fact that she lacks the common sense, sometimes in a very comedic fashion when she adopts slang and tries to use dude in a sentence, and it just feels so awkward and so funny at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
She is definitely fits the criteria. She's the Ojou-sama.
In spirit.
Definitely. Yeah. And what about you, Taros?
Okay.
What is your Ojama of choice?
Not so much that, but I do want to highlight two different aspects in Majikoi. That's right, we're talking about Majikoi again. Best VN ever. Woo, let's go! Specifically, there are two characters who aren't quite what I would call Ojou-samas, but they also do in a sense. One of which being Chris. Her name's Christine, but all of the characters always call her Chris. She is a foreign transfer student who comes into the story shortly afterward. And she shares several aspects of being an Ojou-sama, but also not quite. So I thought it was very interesting in this conversation to wonder about those differences and how much of it qualifies. You mentioned, I mentioned being the daughter of an upper-class family, and her father is a very influential figure who does wield societal power. However, that rarely comes up during the story. It's not like he ever exerts it. It's not like Chris ever exerts it herself. She instead relies on her own strength through training and through combat herself, and through her own very noble personality. You also mentioned about, so when you talk about influencing the story with that power, it's something very much absent through the story from Chris's perspective and her involvement in the plot. However, she tends to have the personality of one, where she does, in a sense, she is very smug and haughty about the main character, who very much prefers to fight in underhanded methods, as opposed to her, who very much wants to take the headstrong, just route into combat. And so
honorable. Okay.
Yes. And so, however, is simply being very prim and proper the same as being an Ojou-sama? In this case, it's hard for me to say so. I would kind of strike it as an example somewhat against, very similar but not quite. Especially when you have someone else from Majikoi, Kokoro, who is very prim and proper, who has the laugh, who treats herself as a very high-standing, proper, high-class member of society. Just off base Majikoi, I don't recall if we ever explore if she really is the daughter of an upper-class family. I don't think... Her being a side character, I don't think we also get to see many examples of her actually using her great influence to change the story, so I think we strike out on that realm as well. But she does have more of the stereotypical aspects going on. And so I wonder to myself, is that enough to qualify someone as an Ojou-sama? If you're missing out on the core aspects, or at the very least, if they're shoved more so in the background or left implied, does that still qualify? Because because like when you mention that they need to an Ojou-sama needs to have someone who uses their influence into the story, then isn't that a slight against side characters? Maya is a main heroine, And so, of course, she has plenty of opportunities to chase her desires and influence the plot and even get a route to herself. But if you're a main character who exists mostly as, supporting cast, you're not going to have that luxury, right?
True, although I also said that they shape the story in one of two ways, or either exerting and having the influence over the story, or having to explain why they can't.
And I didn't ever directly say that, but of course they don't ever mention, oh man, I wish I could instead. So
yeah, exactly. That's why I was going to bring on the Chris example. You mentioned a kind of limbo state of never pivoting in either direction, of not really influencing or using that Ojou-sama powers, nor really pivoting and saying, oh, I can't because my moral code forbids me to, for example. Unless there is something like that. They mentioned that there is some sort of principle by which she doesn't want to use her influence.
No, not that I can ever recall.
Okay.
And so again, it's I meant these more as to illustrate where do you draw the line of someone being an Ojou-sama. It's easy when you have, as you mentioned from Fate, like Luvia Edelfelt, who has all the bells and whistles, who straight exactly. Stereotypical example. Exactly. But we don't always get such clear-cut examples in anime, in visual novels, in other media. And I always like looking at those little definitions, the distinctions of what counts and what doesn't.
So you're saying we need to develop an Ojou-sama meter, and they would have like barely qualifying on the meter scale.
Yeah, we've got like the green light and then the yellow and then the red for like the perfect match for like Ojou-sama overload.
Exactly.
But okay, what about you, Emar? What's an example you got?
Of a not quite Ojou-sama, but maybe Ojou-sama, I prepared from Amatsutsumi, Mana. So, this is an interesting case that I prepared. Unlike Maya, who qualifies through a lot of those qualities she shares with Ojou-sama, Mana doesn't really come from high society. She isn't really an heiress to anybody in particular. She's not from noble lineage. Unless you consider being a demigod, a noble lineage. And she comes, exactly like protagonist, from the same village of people who can speak kotodamas. And a reminder for those who hear about Amatsutsumi for the first time. Amatsutsumi is a story about a protagonist who escapes the village, a secluded village of people practicing a power passed on through generation that allows you to influence other people. And how it works is by speaking, you can formulate commands for others to obey. Okay? And now you may see where I'm going with that, because combination of lack of common sense, being sheltered and detached, being alone in a solitary sense, in a way longing for a normal life and breaking of the shackles, having a very noble and refined, very prideful approach. This is all that characterizes Mana. The only thing she doesn't have is the noble lineage. But everything else she has. She even has a power and an ability to back it up, because she can really tell you to stop bothering her and start counting grains of rice. And you will do that. So in a way, she has almost the entire package, except for the lineage and being a daughter of a powerful figure in a powerful family. So that's an interesting case.
But does she ever do the oh ho 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 laugh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, she does. That's how you it.
Nice.
She even starts very coldly at the story and treats other people, I mean, like regular humans that can't really compare to her because she is a demigod. Like this is an Ojou-sama. Almost the entire package.
Nice, nice. And as a main heroine too, with like her own route?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. And how does her route develop? If it's okay to ask without going into spoilers and whatnot.
The big major thing that happens in her route is the theme of isolation explored. What I mean by that, she speaks such a powerful kotodama, all you can perceive is her and only her. And that's the struggle, because she keeps layering commands to the protagonist that you can only perceive her and you can never speak kotodama against her. And then you have to deal with that kind of life. And that makes for a very intense route. Very intense moment. And it puts her in a position of power and influence quite apparent and quite deadly in a lot of sense. It's very icy in a way she treats other people, especially in that moment and in her route. Definitely, how can I verbalize the best? It showcases that lack of common sense of how to build normalcy, because all she did her entire life is to express what she wants, and she got it. So that's the ultimate test. It's you against her 1v1.
Yeah, I've noticed in a few of these examples, and what you mentioned about Ojou-samas, is that whole element of power. Of them, I guess you could say, being born into power, and having the ability to call in that power at any moment, and how that power affects the story, or, in this case, the protagonist's relationship as well.
Yeah.
And I haven't thought of that before, but I think that's a very good a very good consequence you can draw from the whole Ojou-sama archetype. How a lot of people focus on the whole being smug and bossy attitude about it. But that's also because, in a sense, they usually have the power to back it up.
Exactly. And that power made them bossy.
So I guess that's just the whole the digging one step deeper into the character archetype of what really leads to someone living that kind of life. Then okay.
Yeah, I would say at the same time that's the same approach to power also make them lonely, because you can't really relate to those who don't have that power. And that was the case definitely for Maya, and that was the case definitely for Mana. Those were the characters were defined by being surrounded by people, but ultimately being lonely. Because none of those people they were surrounded with were like them. Yeah, Maya was surrounded by her mates and all the servants she could, but none of those servants were the equal. Right? And
Interesting.
Mana is the same. During most of the Amatsuzumi, she's surrounded with other high schoolers, and so those are regular human. They are not equivalent. They are not equal to her. You can't really relate. So it's an interesting flip side to having power, because you can say how power corrupts, but power also isolates.
I like how you mentioned the whole loneliness aspect too, because that also ties into my example. If we go along to
Da-dum.
Never 7. I haven't ever gotten a chance to talk about this. It's an older title.
You
that's
have
why.
never talked about it?
Yeah, never. All our 7 times we had podcasts. Haha, yeah, that's a great pun. But yes, Saki is one of the heroines in Never Seven, and I think loneliness really plays a part of it. She, again, I don't entirely follow your guidelines for being an Ojou-sama, or mine either, because I don't think we ever really get much insight into whether she's the daughter of an upper-class family or if she ever has a army of 5-star chefs at her disposal, or if she could ever just say one word and force you to listen to her. So we're missing that part of the Ojou-sama equation. However, she does consider herself in much higher standing than everyone else. She frequently orders others around and demands her needs to be met. And she's very much a prim and proper lady. But what her route does go through is that whole feeling of loneliness, of her somewhat being ostracized, of her feeling different from others. And I think that really played into what you mentioned of Ojou-samas being somewhat on their own pedestal because of their own aspect of power. In Saki's case, in fact, I don't think she really has that power, even though she does have the personality. And I think that does also reflect somewhat in the story, and in how she gets treated, and how her actions and, lack of actions have consequences for her. Again, I don't think Saki is quite the stereotypical high-class lady, ringlet, laugh Ojou-sama. I do think, though, that she has some similarities, and I really like exploring those differences, like I mentioned before, of how close you have to be, how far you can be to still be considered part of that archetype.
I mean, the one thing I hear from you listening about that character is maybe that sheltered lifestyle stems from the lack of common sense, because she demands to be treated as noble she may or may not be. But that's not how you form meaningful relationships with people, and that keeps her isolated.
In a sense, yeah. That's also why she
In a
does
way.
have a puppy that she really takes to on the island.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If the development of her character and her route, again, speculating because I haven't read Never Seven, if it stems from the sense of longing for normal life and breaking the shackles that she put on herself, like, that's typical Ojou-sama things.
Yeah, it could be. Also combined with the personality, of course.
Yeah, obviously.
Because after all, that personality is also a lot of the appeal of Ojou-samas.
Yeah. Exactly. And in case of Never Seven, they might have toned down the refined lady has to have the requirement of being a member of an esteemed family. It doesn't have to be as exuberant, right?
Possibly, yeah. But in that sense, then, what about your example, MR? What have you got?
Exuberant, I don't think I can go higher than that. My last example, and that example, together with Mama, because I've recently finished Amatsusumi, that was the original cause for, you know what, Towers, I want to talk about Ojou-sama, because I'm going to speak about Carmilla from Venus Blood Gaia, because holy hell, is that an Ojou-sama. You have all the checkbox, except for one, oddly enough. One is not checked, okay. You have a noble, refined, needlessly prideful at places person, powerful with the ability to back it up somehow. Here, it takes many forms, because she's powerful both in being a leader of her own country, but also being a powerful mage and a very well versed in science. Okay. Additionally, she's very sheltered and detached because she lives in her vampiric castle. Oh, probably this is the moment that I should mention that she's a vampire. A typical setup for a noble and or Ojou-sama, right?
Haha.
She definitely lacks common sense, being that detached from normalcy. On the moral spectrum, on the alignment, she's quite benevolent to her own subjects, but can be very dangerous for the opponent, but has that sense of nobility towards her in her conversation, which I found very intriguing. Not often first meetings with Ojou-sama starts on a diplomatic manners in such a very polite way. I felt like, what the hell? Oftentimes in anime, protagonists are viewed from like, oh, you're a maggot or something beneath her, right? For example, or someone who is destined in case of Muvlov and Maya, right? Very extreme ends. With her, she was very polite, very normal in diplomacy. Like, holy crap, and very refined at that. Now, one trait she doesn't really have, and she has a glorious oh ho 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 laugh, okay? Let's get it out of the way. She does it so many times, she sometimes chokes on her own laugh, okay? And there's a lot of comedy surrounding that. But she isn't alone, and she isn't lonely. And I felt like, holy crap, wait, that makes for a great twist to Ojou-sama. She is quite defined by her deep friendship with another undead spirit, her servant de facto, but ultimately she treats her as an equal in a lot of conversation. And their relationship, as portrayed in the game, is spectacular to watch. How you get insight in how they interact. And when the protagonist worms himself into the politics and tries to win favor of the castle and the vampires, the one thing she gets upset the most over the course of the story is not about lies, deception, politics, etc. No, in one of the events over the course of the story, the mere fact her friend lied is the most upsetting thing. And I felt like, holy crap, having an Ojou-sama defined by her friend is not something I've read before. And I said to myself, no. This is the most typical Ojou-sama with a very, very cool twist. And I knew already. I knew that I need to talk about it.
Very cool.
That was just phenomenal character development and how they made just a slight twist on an overused formula in a lot of places. Heck, think about this. Being a noble and being that prideful, having that noble image means you can't really show that much weakness, right? Because that could shatter the image. And a lot of the times, she acts like a know-it-all. Like she's on the top of the science division, she's on top of the magic, she's the most powerful ruler capable of all. And then, in between those events, you get snippets that she takes extracurricular classes to keep up because she just can't keep up with the updates to new software with computers. Like, what? That is so cool. But in order to keep up the image of being noble, she takes extra effort, and her friend is always with her. And I felt like, holy, this is amazing. 10 out of 10.
There's something about vampires being Ojou-samas that just hits right, huh?
True. I mean, she also has that gigantic drills, so that helps. You know, the hairstyle with either ringlets or drills. But I don't know. Something about the vampires correlates to being noble by default. even though they don't have to be, right? But it defaults to that, and it just fits so neatly.
And so that's a good note to end on for today.
Yep.
Thank you everyone for listening, and it's been one heck of an Ojou-sama filled day with all sorts of high society and class and smugness that I hope have shed more light on the archetype for ourselves and for you guys too.
Exactly. Please share with us in the comments your favorite Ojou-sama, and for all our listeners, one last time, okay? VNture out.
VNture out.